The movie The Fantastic Four: First Step has just been released in theaters, and we finally got to see the version of Reed Richards played by Pedro Pascal. A very intelligent character, a bit in his own world and socially, let's say, awkward. And if you liked him, that's great, because we'll be seeing this character again soon, first in Avengers: Doomsday, then in Avengers: Secret Wars. He should become one of the spearheads of the next saga, maybe even one of the 4 or 5 central characters of the new universe. And while we can say that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in good hands, disasters could also happen because of him, because Reed is one of the most complex characters in the Marvel Universe. He is considered the greatest mind the Earth has ever known, and as such, he is often seen as humanity's last resort. The one you call in a crisis, the one who, by thinking hard enough, ends up finding a solution, a last-minute invention, a brilliant strategy, an unpredictable move. And as a result, people tend to believe that Reed Richards is a monolith, a calm, composed, rational guy. A character who stays in his lab, thinks things through, and ends up coming up with the miracle weapon to fix everything. But that image actually hides a much darker side, a side that even he isn't always aware of. Because Reed, after being entrusted with the keys to the world so many times, sometimes ends up abusing that power, like in the movie with the Franklin-Galactus equation. He only sees the world through facts. This leads him to make decisions he considers rational and logical, but without considering their catastrophic consequences, including for those closest to him. And in some universes, he has even become the embodiment of evil. So, what if we were wrong about Mr. Fantastic? What if he wasn't that reassuring, benevolent genius, but instead a possible threat to the multiverse? Today, we're going to dive into what might be in store for us with the arrival of Reed Richards in the Marvel Cinematic Universe through 10 stories. Comics where he makes bad choices, at best, or even monstrous ones on a multiversal scale. And together, we're going to try to grasp all the richness and complexity of this character, who's more grey than heroic. We know his qualities, but we're going to look at his flaws and try to understand how this Mr. Fantastic could evolve in a universe full of other heroes. The Marvel Cinematic Universe of tomorrow, of course. If you haven't seen the Fantastic Four movie, we might talk about it in this video, so we're entering the spoiler zone, the zone of all dangers. You're with Kevin Buckhart, your favorite evil genius's favorite theorist, favorite generic. He ruined the lives of those around him. From his very first appearance in the first Fantastic Four, Reed Richards already makes a more than questionable choice. That's also true in the Batman adaptation, even though the film doesn't focus on his origin story. Determined to prove the viability of his ship, the Marvel One, which he has been building for years, Reed is ready to do anything to get funding. The first man to cross specific space boundaries. Despite the warnings of his friend Ben Green, who had promised to pilot the ship but believes the tests on cosmic rays are insufficient, Reed decides to launch his mission no matter what. He brings along Sue Storm, who eventually convinces Ben to join them, and Johnny, her teenage younger brother, who is obviously thrilled to take part in a historic expedition. Reed, although the most aware of the dangers, downplays or deliberately hides the risks, surely convinced that his genius will be enough to overcome any obstacle. But given his intellectual abilities, it's obvious that he knew the risks were far too high. The team takes off in secret, but space is unforgiving. As they approach the cosmic ray zone, the storm is far beyond anything Reed could have anticipated. The shield gives way. The crew is exposed to a massive dose of cosmic radiation that alters their biology. Their rushed return to Earth saves them from death, but when they wake up, they discover mutations that are as spectacular as they are traumatic. Ben becomes a rock-like creature, Johnny bursts into flames, Sue becomes invisible, and Reed stretches like rubber. This upheaval changes their lives and destinies forever. What if the mutations had been worse, deadly or useless? Just because their powers help in combat doesn't justify such a risk. His act of pride to fulfill a personal dream literally put the lives of those he loves in danger, and Ben didn't forgive him for a long time. Even though some stories suggest that Reed's original goal was to visit a distant planet similar to Earth, or that the storm was deliberately sent by a cosmic being named Rivos, fans have never been able to completely rule out another theory, that Reed knowingly wanted to test the effects of cosmic rays on human beings. And that he used the crew as test subjects, he created a war against Hulk. Marvel has been trying to develop a new solo Hulk movie for years, and rumors about a World War Hulk have been circulating forever. We still don't know if it will ever happen, but if such an event were to appear on screen, we should be wary of Reed Richards. Founding members of the Illuminati, a secret circle made up of the leaders of each superhero group on Earth. A group led by their pride, seeing themselves as the only ones capable of making tough decisions, in secret. For the entire planet, because it's too hard for humanity to handle. And with Reed's arrival in 616, it's very likely that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Illuminati will eventually form. For now, we've only seen those from Earth. 838 in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And who was leading it? Reed Richards, Ficello, basically, with Tony Stark, Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, and the others. Reed makes a decision with heavy consequences to banish Hulk from Earth after he destroyed another city, in this case, Las Vegas. Without a trial, without discussion, without any serious attempt to help him, their plan is based on a harsh observation: Hulk is too dangerous to stay on our planet. He has caused too much destruction, threatened many lives, and his emotional instability makes him a constant risk. So, they decide to put him to sleep and send him aboard a spaceship to a planet that is supposed to be empty and peaceful. Making this decision behind Bruce Banner's back without his consent exposes the group's full authoritarian violence. And the most chilling part is that Reed, who is capable of understanding Bruce's psychological complexity, chooses the coldest and most radical path. He no longer sees him as a man, but as a biological problem, something to get rid of, a living weapon to lock away at the edge of the universe. So no, Reed isn't the only one responsible, but he's supposed to be the smartest in the group, the one who could have foreseen the consequences. He's the one who convinces the Avengers leader it's the right solution. When you're the brains and things fail, most of the blame ends up on you. He could have looked for a medical, psychological, or human solution, but he preferred the path of control, and obviously, their plan fails. Hulk doesn't land on an empty planet, but on Sakaar, a brutal world where he becomes a slave, a gladiator, then a king, before an explosion destroys everything, his new family along with it. And Hulk, convinced that the Illuminati are behind this decision, returns to Earth at the head of an army determined to take revenge. As Worldbreaker Hulk, this will then be the World War Hulk. Manhattan is devastated. The Illuminati are destroyed one after another, in a violence they could have avoided if they hadn't underestimated the man behind the monster. And what you have to understand is that this kind of decision is typical for Reed. Cold, calculated decisions where efficiency takes precedence over ethics. And in a future Marvel Cinematic Universe, where moral lines are sometimes increasingly blurred. Reed's mistakes? He did the unthinkable against the other heroes. We're going to see it throughout this video. Reed Richards isn't always on the side of good. In fact, he's often on the side of his own scientific success. And in this quest, he sometimes ends up hurting other heroes. One of the best examples is in Secret Wars, one of the most memorable arcs in Marvel Comics. In this event, Reed makes a series of disastrous decisions. It's simple, he loses it. Right from the start, he sides with Tony Stark. By actively supporting the Superhuman Registration Act, a law that forces all superheroes to reveal their identity to the government and submit their actions to constant surveillance. Obviously, it's a moral dilemma between Stark's side, which advocates for control and legislation of all heroes on Earth, and Roger's side, which stands for individual freedom. Except that freedom often goes hand in hand with chaos. Reed therefore chooses the side of logic and order and becomes a staunch supporter of this policy of control, but it doesn't stop there. Along with Tony Stark and Hank Pym, Reed then takes part in building Prison 42, a detention facility located in the Negative Zone, an extremely dangerous antimatter dimension, which we'll see again in the future in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it is so central to the lore of the Fantastic Four. It also houses the army of the fearsome warlord Annihilus, expected to be the next Galactic Saga's villain. This prison is literally out of this world, outside of any jurisdiction, and its purpose is simple: to lock up heroes who refuse to register. Without trial, without defense, Reed, who until now presented himself as a defender of rights, becomes the architect, a space gulag. But that's not all. He also takes part in the creation of Ragnarok, a cybernetic clone of Thor, designed to serve as a super weapon for the pro-registration side. A kind of artificial god, unstable, uncontrollable, powered by the magic of the god of thunder, who was presumed dead at that time. And during a confrontation, this clone kills Goliath, a hero who was loyal nonetheless, a tragedy that Reed had not anticipated, being too absorbed by the technological success of the operation. That's exactly what we'll find in other stories, where Reed forgets the human consequences of his choices, obsessed with scientific achievement. He doesn't realize that he's crossing red lines until it's too late. This Civil War run marks a real turning point in the perception of the character. We discover a much colder, more calculating side of him. He becomes the instrument of a totally unjust system, and this gradual transformation leads him to isolation, even within his own family. It's at that moment that Sue, devastated by what he's done, decides to leave him. She leaves him a moving letter in which she reproaches him for his lack of morals, empathy, and emotional connections. And that's when we realize that he's not just a brilliant scientist. He's a man who can lose himself in his own certainties. He is the worst father and husband. Obsessed with science, Reed Richards often ends up neglecting what really matters, and Sue Storm has experienced that more than once, as we just saw, and as in the movies. She knows that, despite himself, his brain prioritizes solutions over compassion, even in the comics. She has left him several times, mainly for a very simple reason. He is incapable of setting boundaries for himself. The most striking example is the moment when he literally put Franklin, his son, into a coma by bombarding him with antimatter using an experimental gun. And yes, his own son. And as if that wasn't enough, we later learn in the Fantastic Four Power Pack miniseries that he also filled his son with nanomachines to monitor him remotely without telling anyone. Of course, that's already a very questionable decision, but the worst part is that it turns out these nanomachines could be radioactive. So here we have the smartest man in the world who may have given his kid cancer. Quite the atmosphere, huh? Reed is clearly not a role model, and the suffering he causes isn't limited to his children. Sue has also taken a lot, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. One of the most controversial examples is in Fantastic Four, issue 281, released in 1985. In this episode, Sue is under the influence of Psycho Man, a villain who amplifies her negative emotions until she turns into an evil version of herself called Malice. When the team fails to bring her back to her senses, Reed makes an extreme decision. He thinks the only solution is to provoke a violent emotional shock. And then, he humiliates her verbally, and then physically, he even goes so far as to slap her. A moment that was controversial at the time, and rightfully so. A run that would probably be even harder to accept today, but it perfectly embodies a central trait of Reed. He always acts because he thinks he's the most logical voice, without perspective, without real moral awareness, even when it's, yes, in the Fantastic Four cases, you could say he was a good father. For now, but in the future, if his obsession with science takes over again, he could very well start experimenting again, on his children or on his wife. And in that case, a divorce from Sue, or at least a temporary separation, would be far from unlikely. He doomed his universe in Marvel Zombies' Dead Days, the prequel to Marvel Zombies, which tells the story of the beginning of the infection on Earth. In 2149, Reed Richards literally condemns humanity to a fate worse than death. So, be warned, sensitive souls should abstain. Everything changes when he sees his two children being devoured before his eyes, a shock that drives him into madness. While the heroes, survivors, and uninfected are still trying to organize themselves, they trust Reed and give him a crucial mission to find a cure. But instead of looking for a solution, Reed completely changes his perspective. According to him, this virus is actually the next step in human evolution. Just like that, and in a moment of misguided genius, he makes a monstrous decision. He secretly and deliberately infects the other members of his family. Not only does he doom his own family, but he also causes the final collapse of the resistance, because the zombified Fantastic Four infiltrate the survivors and spread the virus from within. The result? The entire universe is screwed. All of this happened because Mr. Fantastic was convinced he was right, which proves that when he thinks he's right, he can do anything without ever questioning himself. By acting like he thought he was a god. The Fantastic Four reportedly won't appear in the Marvel Zombies miniseries on Disney+, but I admit a spin-off with them could be a wild idea. The Council of Reeds. Honestly, the Council of Reeds is an institution we could very well see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in less than 3 years before the conclusion of the Multiverse saga, and that would be far from insignificant. This council made its very first appearance in Fantastic Four number 570 in 2009, written by Jonathan Hickman. In this episode, Reed Richards discovers an interdimensional portal called the Bridge. Yes, like the teleportation tech in the movie, this bridge leads to a multiversal council of only his alternate versions, all sharing one chilling trait. They have given up their families, abandoned their children, their friends, their humanity to devote themselves to a single goal, solving all the problems of the multiverse. But the more you observe their actions, the more you discover the excesses of an extreme ideology, entirely based on pure intelligence, cold and detached from any emotion. Their goal is to create a utopia. The problem is that their methods are becoming more and more radical. As early as issues 571 and 572, we witness the first major slip-up. We understand that their daily routine consists of killing Galactus beings from parallel realities. And in their extremism, they want to arbitrarily destroy anything they consider dangerous to peace. we will understand that entire civilizations have been manipulated or eradicated simply because the Council judged them too hostile. For example, the Interdimensional Reed Council gathered the Doctor Dooms in the Council's basement and destroyed their brain functions to turn them into vegetables. And what's frightening is the lack of humanity in these Reeds, because these variants in the end are just him, but who made slightly different decisions. And this storyline really pushes the character's potential to the limit. It extrapolates everything Reed could become if he lost his footing, if he sacrificed his emotions in the name of cold scientific logic. So, will we get to see this council in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Pedro Pascal? But also, why not? Miles Teller, Ewan Gruffudd, Krasinski, and other former actors, maybe in Avengers, Doomsday, or Secret Wars. To be continued, he created a universe in his own image. And how can we talk about these variants without mentioning the worst of them all? If there's another alter ego of Reed that we might see appear in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's definitely the Maker. With the Secret Wars adaptation by the Russo brothers, it's hard to imagine that he could be left out, especially since in the 2015 run, he was one of the main characters opposed to Reed. From Earth 616, the last two survivors of a ruined multiverse. The Maker, without a doubt one of the most cruel and disturbing villains in the entire history of Marvel Comics. On Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe, Reed had a difficult childhood. It's only with the creation of the Fantastic Four that he starts to find his place. But everything changes when Sue Storm rejects his marriage proposal in Ultimate Fantastic Four, Requiem #1. This psychologically devastating rejection for him marks the beginning of his descent into evil. He starts by faking his own death, blowing up his house with his parents and his two younger siblings still inside. Despite a complicated relationship with his family, this decision makes them purely collateral victims, sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. He quickly goes on the offensive against the Fantastic Four. Sue, upon discovering what he has become, tries to stop him, but Reed captures her and then tortures her until she is on the verge of death. That he killed his family was already abominable, but that he did this to Sue shows just how far the Maker is willing to go to justify his choices and impose his vision of the world. He then decides to create Earth 6160, a universe entirely shaped in his image. He wants a world where everything is under control, where everyone lives by his rules. To achieve this, he builds an interdimensional bridge that allows him to observe the realities affected by the incursions. He begins to methodically destroy the other Earths to test his theories. In Avengers issue 41, we learn that he has wiped out 67 entire universes, meaning billions of deaths, simply erased from existence. When he finally begins creating his own reality in Ultimate Invasion issue 1, his first act is radical, making sure that superheroes do not exist. He eliminates or neutralizes anyone who might challenge him, Lucky Barnes, Doctor Strange, the Fantastic Four. And he establishes an absolute dictatorship, with a secret council that commits atrocities on a planetary scale to expand his authority. And that's not all. In Ultimate number 4, he even goes so far as to dissect the right of Earth 6160. Then he forces him to relive the death of his teammates over and over again, until he abdicates, gives up his name, and agrees to become the Doctor Doom of this universe. And that's only a fraction of the horrors that the Maker has committed. A terrifying, fascinating character who could even redefine the very notion of an antagonist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He keeps everything secret in the Judgment Day event, more specifically in Fantastic Four number 47. As Earth is potentially facing its final hours against the ancestral Celestial, Reed Richards makes a choice that is very revealing of his personality. Rather than spending valuable time with his loved ones, he chooses to isolate himself with his thoughts, thinking, searching for a solution, all the while knowing perfectly well that the one he found to save his children won't work. And yet, he makes them believe that they are all safe and sound, just so they don't panic and don't disturb him. But this isn't an isolated case. In the Mad Fraction series, in 2013, Reed discovers that the cosmic rays that gave them their powers are actually a kind of super cancer. A slow, incurable poison is killing them gradually. Does he tell his family? Any improvement? Of course not. He decides to keep it a secret, to bear the burden alone, and look for a solution on his own. Except obviously, as often happens with him, it all ends up blowing up in his face. He condemned billions of beings in 1983 during John Byrne's run on the Fantastic Four series. More specifically, in issue 262, Reed Richards makes an absolutely controversial decision. He chooses to save Galactus from certain death, while the latter is dying of hunger. And he doesn't do it by consensus, nor after consulting anyone, but solely based on an intuition, a personal conviction that Galactus is necessary for the cosmic balance. lacking proof or evidence, yet with self-righteous certainty that he serves a greater purpose. Reed even mobilizes the Avengers to build a machine using the power of Thor's hammer to restore energy to the world devourers. So, yes, he saves Galactus, fully aware that this act means resurrecting a being who destroys entire planets, and also aware that this involves millions, even billions, of living beings. This decision leads to his arrest by the Intergalactic Tribunal, made up of species that have suffered from the destruction caused by Galactus, including the Kree. He is accused of the worst crimes against existence, nothing less. It will take the intervention of Galactus himself, who testifies in favor of Reed and summons Eternity, an incarnation of the universe, so that he escapes the death penalty. But despite this trial and this cosmic absolution, the fact remains. Reed Richards restarted the Galactus killing machine, and after being saved, Galactus continued to consume planets, including inhabited ones. By saving a destructive entity, Reed indirectly caused the death of billions of lives. On the altar of his excessive pride, he used a weapon capable of destroying the universe. In issue 50 of the Fantastic Four, which concludes the very famous Galactus trilogy, Reed Richards discovers the existence of the ultimate Nullifier. An absolutely terrifying weapon, described as the most dangerous in the universe, literally capable of erasing Galactus from existence. When he consults Uatu, the Watcher, the latter presents the Nullifier to him as the last possible resort to stop Galactus. But what makes this weapon so feared is that it doesn't just threaten a single being if misused, it could also destroy the entire universe. Uatu warns him very clearly that no mortal is capable of grasping the true scope of the Nullifier. It's a weapon of such complexity and cosmic power that the slightest mistake could lead to the annihilation of all reality. But Reed, faced with the titanic threat of Galactus, who is about to devour the Earth, decides, in a moment of desperation and urgency, to take the risk of wielding the weapon as a direct threat. If Galactus doesn't give up his attempt, he'll use it, and it works. Galactus, realizing that Reed is willing to go all the way, gives up and withdraws. But really ask yourself what Reed would have done if Galactus hadn't given in to the blackmail, if he had to go all the way and actually use the Nullifier. When you know that even Galactus fears this weapon, it seems obvious that its destructive potential is beyond comprehension. Reed, only partially understanding this object, could have doomed his world, or even worse. We will learn much later that the Nullifier is almost impossible to use without serious consequences, and that it takes a will of absolute precision to channel its power. Once again, Reed acts hastily, without real perspective, with the fate of his universe literally in his hands. So, Reed Richards, leader of the Fantastic Four and future Avengers films, may not be the hero you expected. Sure, he has saved the galaxy countless times, but he has also caused a lot of harm to his universe, and sometimes to those adjacent to it. Through his rational, logical, but seldom human decisions, he could greatly impact the Marvel Cinematic Universe's future, though not always positively. After all, he's done some wild things. This crazy month of July is finally coming to an end, and if you haven't seen my guide and my analysis of the fantastic cases, it's right here. We'll see each other again on Sunday for a new video, and in the meantime, don't forget to stay curious. That's the secret to being happy.